And it was sad to see dads trying to take care of their families and being like, on the phone with their wives, being like, honey, whatever you can find, just get it. We'll worry about finances later. And you just had this people's look of sheer just not knowing what to do. They were scared.
Okay, continue CPR. Get him on the monitor. Are you step down?
I've seen a lot of people that wear gloves on their hands. When we work in the hospital and you see nurses putting gloves on.
2, 1, shock delivered. All right, continue CPR.
1, 2.
We're doing a specific task, and then we're throwing those gloves away, washing our hands, putting a new pair on to do a different task. And so you'll see people out in the community who are constantly wearing the same gloves all day, and then they touch their cell phone, they touch, that box of cereal at the store, they're rubbing their face, they got their mask on, and they keep putting it on and off, on and off.
Pharmacy, get a milligram of Epi ready in case we need it.
Okay, we got to get IV.
I just was looking at a study today, excuse me, done in Hong Kong. Yeah, yeah, COVID. It was actually done in Hong Kong with hamsters, because hamsters, their enzymes closely match ours, and so their route of transmission is kind of similar to humans.
Okay.
And so they did a study where they had one group of hamsters wear masks and the other cage not wear masks, which I want to see a hamster wearing a mask. It'd be funny. But they found that it cut the the transmission rate by like at least 50% up to 75%. So they inoculated, they infected a certain group of hamsters that didn't have masks, and the other ones that were wearing the masks had like a slight increase of getting infected. But when they covered the hamsters with the masks that were infected, the rate of transmission got cut in 50%. So
Who's the main nurse?
we have the strategic stockpile.
Yeah.
That everybody's like, oh, it's depleted and stuff like that. Well, I just got done doing a big paper on it. N95 masks are only good for 5 years. After 5 years, you can't use them. So they do have an expiration date. And so on one hand, we can say, like, why don't we have millions of these things stored around? But you got to look at the storage, the maintenance, and then they're only good for 5 years. And then you got to resupply that stockpile. And so, it's just kind of, there's just, when something like this happens, there's just no clear answers. And we just kind of do the best we can, because
He's 50-year-old male. He's hospital day 2. He's in full code.
she was unconscious at the time, but her vitals were okay. I could feel a pulse in her wrist, so I knew she had adequate perfusion. I actually was on the phone with 911, and it just got done telling them, she's okay, she's breathing, she's got a pulse. I'm a nurse, and, giving them that. And as soon as I hung up, I looked down, and she started doing those agonal breaths, which looks like a fish out of water, taking those gulps of air.
And we're live. Welcome back to another Gutter Fighting Secrets Tactical Podcast. Today's going to be Tactical Podcast number 29. We're here with the Wilderness RN. Craig has been working as a RN for some time now. So now, Craig, I know that you are currently working towards your LPN, and that's Licensed Nurse Practitioner, if I'm correct?
Just a nurse practitioner. It's actually the FNP. Family Nurse Practitioner. That's what I'm working on. Yep.
Okay, all right. And so I decided to ask you to come on. I know we were chatting back and forth. I was kind of digging the page, and you were saying that you'd be happy to come on and touch base with us, because I know that not only are you a medical professional, but you also have a solid grasp of understanding about outdoors, wilderness medicine, these types of things.
Yep.
So I thought it would be really a perfect fit. So I want to say, first of all, man, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you coming on. And
yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, definitely, man. And I mean, I'm sure you know, I've been trying to find more and more medical practitioners and professionals to come on, especially during this whole COVID crisis, to kind of give us some general opinions and general guidelines that we can go by. So what are your thoughts? I'm going to jump right into it now. And what are your thoughts about what's going on with COVID and kind of general terminology? What are we looking at here?
Well, it's obviously a respiratory illness that's, going across the country, and it originated in China. And people coming over here on the cruise ships, I think, is something that really kind of kicked it off, because we were bringing people back. And then at the beginning of this whole thing, they were letting people go and then getting positives on them and have to bring them back. And obviously, when you have a pandemic like this and the world is just so united, we can fly to the middle of Africa in a day. So it's just so easy to travel nowadays that it was going to come whether we shut down the borders or not. And so, another thing is that I often see is being a problem area is big cities like New York, San Diego, Los Angeles, Sacramento. The pollution, because as we see in Wuhan, the reason I think that there's a big problem over in China, especially in that area, was due to the pollution, people smoking, their overall lung health, because we kind of bring that same mentality over here to New York, where they have a lot of pollution, maybe a lot of people that smoke, so their lung quality, the health of their lungs, isn't the greatest. And so then you introduce this COVID-19, which attacks the lungs. Those people that have, unhealthy lungs, basically, susceptible to this disease, as well as those that have, they're immunocompromised, they have diabetes, hypertension was a big one that they were worried about. And so when you bring all this together, you introduce COVID, it's kind of a recipe for disaster, as well as the elderly population. We're seeing in nursing homes huge numbers of people getting sick due to this respiratory illness. And then, a lot of people that are going to the ICU after, going to the hospital. So it's respiratory, a lot of vents were needed and still are needed. And, there's a criteria for that. I know one of the biggest things that, we were worried about is, the oxygenation of these patients. And so we were kind of told that, between all the research, as soon as they get to like 6 liters on that nasal cannula in the nose, instead of going to like a BiPAP or a CPAP, one of those assisted breathing machines that, a lot of people use to help sleep, instead of going to that, which helps, it was just like go directly to, intubation on the ventilators in the ICU, and that way they could just try to save those lungs from getting too damaged. Because it's kind of interesting, like for my research from COVID, is that it attacks the body. It's just kind of, I'm not going to say it's like the flu, but it kind of works in that same process, because it's obviously a viral virus. And so your body's responding to it. And I think that's the biggest thing that happens, is you have what's called a cytokine storm. And so your body's like producing all this inflammation. It's trying to fight this. And then your lungs just tend to, fill up with fluid, pneumonia. And so your body just kind of shuts down on itself, because it's just so overwhelmed trying to fight off this new virus that it has no immunities to. And so that's just what I've noticed with it. But, I just think it's kind of a, bigger cities are seeing the huge impacts. And so, I mean, I could be wrong, but that's just kind of my interpretation of, how it's kind of getting spread around. And then you get travelers coming over to different areas.
I mean, I'm from New York, and I remember walking around out here, man, and must have been 3-4, time flies, 4 or 5 months ago, right before the pandemic hit. I was thinking to myself, we're going to get fucked from this. This is going to be really bad.
Oh, yeah.
And here we are, and it's the epicenter. So,
and, New York, let's look at some other things. And, it can be kind of a good example. You got subways, you have mass transportation, hardly anybody in New York has their own vehicle. Everything's public transportation. And so you get a few people that are sick. They're in a subway on one of the what are they called? Subway trains. and all of a sudden they're coughing, they're touching, the poles that you hold on to, they're in the seats. The next person comes by, touches those same surfaces, and then all of a sudden they're scratching their nose, they're, eating something. And it's just the recipe for disaster in most cases. Where I'm out here in the inner Mountain West, we don't have mass transportation. I can't remember the last time I was on a bus in the city. And so, I don't think the route of, transmission is as prevalent over here as it is over there. And that's something that I think's playing a huge factor into how quickly it spread in those bigger cities.
Now, we've heard in New York City of a lot of the MTA, mass transit workers, getting really sick and dying. And they're saying that that's because of the viral load.
Mm-hmm.
And so for our viewers at home, if you haven't heard of viral load yet, Craig, you could probably break it down a little bit better than I might be able to, what viral load kind of means.
Yeah, so viral load is just the amount of the virus that you're exposed to and how your body, how fast that virus is replicating inside your body. And so I've heard that, the more you're exposed to it, the higher your load's going to be compared to maybe a lesser chance of being exposed.
Now, here's something that I had really been wondering on. And when they give you a vaccine, there's, I think, two different kinds, right? There's a live one and a dead one.
Mm-hmm.
And the live one's actually got live virus in it, but is it not enough of it to go ahead and make you really sick? Is that what
it's almost impossible to get sick from when they give you the live virus.
It's just such a small amount.
Yeah, such a small amount, and it's been weakened.
Now, if someone were to go ahead and get infected with a small amount of this virus by, say, touching something and then touching their nose, wouldn't that ultimately, as long as they don't get too sick, wouldn't that ultimately kind of be a good thing for them? Because then they would have the antibodies?
Yeah, we're kind of seeing that with those people that are being asymptomatic,
Yeah.
And so we hear about the asymptomatic people that were worried about getting grandma and grandpa sick. And that's why, they were really pushing that stay at home, and why we're seeing such a push for wearing masks out in public, because, everybody's kind of on the fence with wearing masks because they're worried about the political, ramifications. Am I giving in? But we need to look at it like, depending on the situation, if we're in a place like New York and I go outside, I'm going to wear a mask just for the, off chance that it does protect me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if I'm symptomatic, where I'm a hospital worker, I feel kind of an obligation to wear a mask out in public when I'm going to places that have a lot of people. Because what if I'm one of those people who was exposed to it but is asymptomatic? I'm going to try my best part as a healthcare worker not to spread that around. And so that's why I wear a mask when I'm out in public with a lot of people. Now, if I'm just going to the gas station or running into a place that doesn't have a lot of people, I'm not wearing a mask just because my risk of exposing others is minimal at best. And so,
as far as wearing masks to protect yourself,
yeah,
I know that there was a big debate about this at first.
Yep.
First week I was at the Fire Academy, I learned that you can, get something by 4 paths, right? Inhalation, ingestion, injection, and absorption.
Yep.
So if you cut all of those factors off, and pretty much for this virus, that would rule out everything except inhalation, right?
Yep.
Or I guess absorption by touching your, but at the same point, if you wear a mask, that's got to do something. Like, there's really no debate about that, right?
I just was looking at a study today, excuse me, done in Hong Kong.
Virus.
Yeah, yeah, COVID. It was actually done in Hong Kong with hamsters, because hamsters, their enzymes closely match ours, and so their route of transmission is kind of similar to humans.
Okay.
And so they did a study where they had one group of hamsters wear masks and the other cage not wear masks, which I want to see a hamster wearing a mask. It'd be funny. But they found that it cut the transmission rate by like at least 50% up to 75%. So they inoculated, they infected a certain group of hamsters that didn't have masks, and the other ones that were wearing the masks had like a slight increase of getting infected. But when they covered the hamsters with the masks that were infected, the rate of transmission got cut in 50%. So, kind of, let's see, what's the best way to put this? It confirms that if you wear a mask and somebody who's not wearing masks is infected and they like cough in your general facility, at your general area, you can have a good chance of getting infected up to like 33%.
Okay.
But if they're wearing the mask too and you're both wearing a mask, it cuts that by 50%.
Wow. Okay.
Basically is the gist of the study without me actually looking at it. So if both parties are wearing it, it dramatically cuts it in half, which I think is a good thing,
Absolutely.
And so, we also got to remember right now with any study being done at this moment, it's not peer reviewed. It hasn't been put through all the tests. And so everything's changing. And so we got to take it day by day.
Yeah.
And so, another study that they came up with is that this COVID-19 isn't staying on surfaces as long as they thought. And so that route of transmission might not be as serious as in the past. And so, as we're getting further and further away from the start of this thing, we're going to learn more and more. And so I hope that this translates into less and less fear out in the public. Maybe we can start opening up parks more and kind of getting back to our normal.
Especially with the summertime being now. They're saying they think this virus does a lot worse in the UV light and the warm, humid environments, which is a great thing, at least for the states that are humid. So I'm hoping that we start seeing things open back up because our economy obviously can't take much more of this shutdown.
No. Well,
go ahead.
Even being a hospital worker, what's funny, it's not funny, what's interesting, I guess would be better to say, what's interesting is nobody's going to the hospitals, and they're seeing this around the country. And because they're afraid of going to the ER and catching COVID from somebody else, people are staying home and dealing with chronic heart failure, COPD, and all this stuff at home, just trying to maybe bypass this COVID and then go in. Yeah. And same thing with cancer. People aren't getting their normal cancer screenings. And so we're going to see a huge increase eventually of people coming in with COPD exacerbation, chronic heart failure. And it's just, they're going to be sicker because they stayed home longer and coming in when they first started feeling sick. And so I think we're going to start seeing that because people were too scared to come into the hospital during this whole COVID shutdown because of that.
Bring up the immune system.
I'm
sorry to cut you off, but you really
worries.
Struck a bell with me. What do you think about people's immune system after these lockdowns are eventually over? They're going to be weak, aren't they?
Personally, that's what I think.
Yeah.
That's personal experience because I know my immune system by working in the hospital has gotten better because I'm obviously around a lot of sick people. But at the same time, when I get something, I feel like I get sick, like I get hit harder because of, this being sick, being around sicker people, even with wearing the proper PPE and stuff, as much as we wash our hands and take care of ourselves, it's just that stuff is just constantly around you. And so that's why it's very important, to make sure you're washing your hands, taking care of yourself at home, taking the vitamins. I just do airborne for myself.
Yeah. Vitamin C, zinc, that type of thing.
Zinc, because as long as you're taking it in the proper dosage, like what's recommended on the bottle, talk to your doctors about it. But as long as you're doing the proper dosage, it's not going to hurt you. It can only help you.
They're coming out with some interesting studies about vitamin D now that might actually be even more valuable than vitamin C for people.
Oh, for sure. And I know back east in New York and stuff, they're doing both the regimen of vitamin D and a huge dose of vitamin C for people that are sick with the COVID.
They came out with interesting studies in the 70s about intravenous vitamin C and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if maybe they'll find some validity in that type of large dose.
Yeah, I know some of the people that I've talked to back east that have been known with this in the epicenters. They've been doing intravenous vitamin C already.
I've said for a long time, I think that has a lot of promise, and hopefully now they'll find some, like I said, find some validity in that. Now you brought up something about, I also want to touch on about smoking. So I don't know if you've, heard about this at all, but they're allegedly finding that when nicotine is attaching to these ACE2 receptors in the lungs, that it is actually offering some kind of weird level of protection.
Huh, I haven't heard that.
Okay.
No.
And I could be misquoting the article that I was reading, but that's essentially what I understand.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really know much about, nicotine and the effects of the lungs, but when we're looking at it, it's the effects of smoking. It's, are very, the risks don't outweigh the benefits when you smoke. And so
don't go out and start smoking, guys, just to protect
exactly. Yourself. Maybe if they recommend nicotine patches in the future to avoid this, then that's something that goes, we'll get to when we get to.
The game there. I'm all about the nicotine gum right now, man.
Yeah.
So how about vaping? Do you think, in your personal opinion, just all medical, titles aside, I think it would be worse for somebody that would be potentially worried about pneumonia, right?
Oh, yeah. Vaping, when I have friends that vape, I tell them, that's the one thing I would stop because, between the canisters or, the vapes themselves exploding, you're introducing this, this temperature into your lungs that's hotter than what you're normally used to.
Yeah.
And so people have seen burns. It's just a whole mess of complications. And again, it's so relatively new that we just don't have studies on it to see how it's going to affect people 20, 30 years from now.
Yeah.
And so I would just stay away from vaping, period.
Can't be good. Just being wet and taking wet shit into your lungs, can't be good. I know pulmonologists have said that it's slightly better than smoking, but I don't even know about that, man.
Well, because you're breathing in that hot vapor, you don't have all the carcinogens.
Yeah.
All the cancer-causing stuff that you would see in a cigarette itself. But again, the benefits compared to the risks, I personally wouldn't do it.
Yeah. No, I did do it for a long time, and it was weird. I felt like I had a harder time breathing with the vapes than I ever did smoking, and I was a heavy smoker before that, so I don't trust it. ACE2 receptors. Can you tell us kind of anything about, could you break it down basically for the layman out there if you have any knowledge about kind of what's going on when a virus attaches to our ACE2 receptors?
Well, I'm actually in a pathology class right now, and so that's kind of a weak subject until I get to it. But I just know that with the COVID-19, it's just obviously COVID, the coronavirus, the corona part means crown. And so it has all these little, attachment like fingers that can easily attach to our lung tissue. And then it kind of gets absorbed by that lung tissue. And so it's kind of really hard for our white blood cells and the things that eat viruses to kind of protect ourselves. It's kind of hard for them to get to it because it's covered by the protective layer of our own tissue because it likes to kind of burrow in from what I've seen. And so that's kind of how it's staying hidden from our body's immune system for so long. And then after it replicates so many times, then it kind of busts out. And by then it's already, overwhelming our system. And that's why people are getting sick.
So that could be another reason why if you inhale this aerosolized vapor, it's actually way worse for you than if you simply touch some shit and pick your nose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Because it'll get to you quicker.
Huh.
So
now, I got to ask this, man. Feel free to toss it away if you don't like it. But again, with all work aside, your personal opinion. I mean, was this thing grown in a lab somewhere? Are we dealing with some kind of bioweapon or what?
I think one or two things. I think it was either they were working on it in a lab and somebody got sick and then went out into the public without realizing it. They were either asymptomatic or they just thought maybe it was a cold. And so I think it could have happened that way. And the other way is, you look at some of those wet markets. There's no, FDA, there's no regulation on those places. And if it's just such a mess and they're, bringing in bats and stuff or whatever they think brought it in, and, but I kind of think that we'll find that the lab over there in Wuhan maybe had a hand in this, maybe not intentionally, but because of ineptness, it got away from them.
I personally have a theory that this thing was an incomplete bioweapon that they were working on. It's just too good as a biological weapon. If you really think about it, just from an art of war perspective, what would you want your ideal biological weapon to do? Well, you'd want it to infect like crazy amounts of people. You'd want it to infect men specifically.
Yeah.
You'd want it to kind of have a long, gestation period, so that you can affect so many other people before you even know you're infected. It just seems to me, and obviously I'm no virologist at all, but it seems to me like cogently suspicious.
Yeah, I mean, and especially during the whole Hong Kong protest, and then this comes and stops that cold.
Yeah.
It's just like the timing's just too good.
And the trade war with the United States as well. I mean, I'm not saying that it was anything where they intentionally did this, but here's what I think, man, is that they knew this thing. Well, we now know that they knew this thing was something worse than it was before they admitted it. I think that they let it get out, not intentionally, but intentionally enough that not simply their economy would be ruined. They wanted everyone to be at the party as well and going through hard times.
Well, as we're kind of finding out with the World Health Organization right now, is that they knew a lot and they weren't telling the rest of the world to kind of save face. And so had we known about it earlier, I think everybody could have taken proper precautions, and China really had the chance to help the world. But I think they were trying to contain it themselves. And I've heard on, different media sources that they were trying to make this virus so that they could show that they were just as good as the United States when it comes to, preventing these kind of viruses or curing them or coming out with a vaccine. And so I think, not much down the road, but from at least a year or two from now, we're going to see exactly kind of what happened as we get more of the information out. And I think we're all going to have a different opinion a couple of years from now of what actually happened.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to fall in between it being a bioweapon or, made in a lab and it just got away from them,
I mean, I'm of the firm belief that we will be at war before long, and I'm not necessarily saying with China.
Yeah.
I think perhaps Iran would probably be more of a proxy war, in my opinion, because we can't fight China head to head.
No.
Nukes, right? But yeah, it's crazy times we're living in, man, and I don't think that they're over. It seems like as soon as 2020 hit, it was like bam, one thing after the other.
Oh yeah, I mean, what's next?
I don't even want to know, dude.
We got murder hornets. We've had tornadoes in places that normally don't get tornadoes. Michigan just had like 2 dams go down, and so people are evacuating. I mean, we're coming into the hurricane season, tornado season.
Yeah. It's crazy. And, I mean, we now have a lot of military action going on in the South Pacific. I mean, that's started pretty much as soon as this quarantine started, which I thought was interesting. And then,
again, China's just making China's just making a play. They've built those islands out there in the South China Sea.
Yeah. And,
they're putting military installations out there. I know Taiwan was waving a flag saying, hey, like, this coronavirus is getting away from them, and nobody listened to them. And, Taiwan's had an X painted on them for a long time from, the communist regime there in China. And so it's just.
How crazy was it that the WHO couldn't even freaking accept what Taiwan was saying because of their ties with China.
Exactly. And, and like you said, in Iran, they had their own missile take out their plane that was, a civilian plane, and then they tried covering it up. It's just,
We
there's a lot of
went to war
pieces.
with them over that, man.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of pieces. And like before going into nursing, I studied international studies, and I was actually going to go law school and kind of go that route and maybe work in DC for, doing something over there, because I love international politics.
Yeah.
And so, it's just scary, because when the background, not just is what's happening now, but the history of what's leading up to this, especially in Iran, because the U.S. used to have a huge footprint in Iran. And then you had the uprising, you had all that stuff with Jimmy Carter and the American, embassy being taken over. So there's always been these hostilities. And then, it's just, so it's not just the last 4 years under Trump. It's not just the last little bit. I mean, this is their hatred for us, our complications with them. It's been going on. And so eventually, like you said, I think it's going to come to a head, and you're going to have boots on the ground, and we don't want that. But whether it's 20 years from now or next year, it's just, you just can't avoid it.
No,
because of the complications.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the White House is kind of getting more and more tough with them all the time, which I think is what we exactly need to do. But nonetheless, the fast boats that keep harassing our ships. Now the White House has kind of given the Navy some new SOPs, and said, just shoot them, just blow them out of the water if you have to. Which is like, damn, dude, like, how close are we getting there?
Under Obama, you had those our boats that had like mechanical failure, and drifted too close to Iranian waters, and then they took them prisoners, and so, they also have been harassing commercial ships, the oil ships, and so they just keep prodding, keep egging, just testing the waters to see how much they can get away with,
I think it's just last month where they were conducting cyber attacks against Israel's infrastructure, like pretty hardcore. It's heating up out there, that's for sure, man.
And then they placed some mines on an oil tanker and stuff. Several months ago, and
it was the Houthi rebels.
Yeah. Okay. But aren't they supplying?
Yeah. Exactly.
Like, isn't there, all these fingers and everybody else's, wars that are coming from all these different places,
It's crazy how as soon as, I realize that the conflicts between, Western culture and the Middle East has been going on way before 9/11. That's obviously pretty much what led up to it. But at the same point, it's interesting how as soon as we went into Iraq, and it was more, I think, Iraq than Afghanistan, as soon as we went into Iraq, it just like kicked off. And it'll never be the same out that way.
Oh, no. You brought up before 9/11, let's look at Thomas Jefferson, clear back in those days with, Tripoli, and, our sailors being taken, hostage and captured and stuff and held for ransom, by the people in, that area at that time frame. Thomas Jefferson, wanted to study them out, those people in that region. So he read the Holy Quran, and that's where you get the Marines and all, the shores of Tripoli is because they sent people in there, and so, from the birth of our nation, there's always been that East versus West. And so.
Yeah. And it's crazy how the war of attrition is over doctrine, over like religious doctrine. And I never get religious or political really on my show, other than to talk about geopolitics. But it's just crazy how, the three monotheistic religions, they're so similar, but they fight so much with each other,
Oh yeah. Just, it's just interesting how all this is playing together right now.
And it's interesting too that COVID has really given us a timeout. It's almost like a higher power that be was like, you guys are getting too close to World War III. Like, chill. Like,
Well, it's funny that you said that because like last year, I was like, when we had 9/11, the country came together. As bad as it was, like the United States, like somebody from the outside came and attacked us, and no matter how much fighting we do inside the United States against ourselves, left versus right, rich versus poor, when somebody from the outside attacks us, we always come together and stand united. And I was like, something's going to happen here shortly that is going to cause us to forget our differences and come back together.
mm-hmm.
And I think COVID, I'm not saying I'd ever wish this on anyone, but instead of looking this as a Democrat versus Republican or who's right and who's having the most death, we need to look at this as like something that we can all come together on and help one another out and kind of forget our petty differences and stand united once again.
I'm with you 110% on that. It seems crazy, though, at this point, how divided our country remains. And it's like, if it wasn't over the president, now it's over this stupid shit.
Yep. We got people that are saying if you go out and you go work, you're killing grandma. And you have those people that are saying, staying home, there's nothing going on. It's all sham. So, you got two different sides. And it's like, we know it's here. In some areas, it might not be as bad. And so we need to find that middle ground where, we're protecting ourselves. We're protecting those people that have, the higher risk of contracting it. But again, we're not destroying our economy because the economy is going to have a lot longer effect than COVID will. For those people that it affects and that, are, die from it, yeah, that's going to have a longer effect on their loved ones and themselves because they're not around. But when we look at the nation as a whole, the economy is what we, should really worry about.
Yeah, I'm in agreement there. And it's, like you said, there needs to be some kind of middle ground because the states that don't have a lot of cases, I think, should probably be opening back up, which is, I know slowly we are.
Yeah.
Then the ones, unfortunately, like New York, New Jersey, powerhouses of the economy. Wall Street, all of that, and they're just getting slammed. I don't know, man. War seems to me to be the only way out of this, economically speaking.
Yeah. But I wouldn't wish that on anyone,
No.
But,
so, what do you think about before I go into that, I want to circle back around a second and ask you a question about the flu.
Yeah.
Is viral load a thing with the flu as well?
I think when you're talking virus, period, viral load's very important. I know, like with, like say, let's talk about something that happens in the hospital every so often is, you get like a needle stick, you get poked with somebody else's syringe when you're given a shot or something like that. And so they talk about like with, everybody's worried about getting like hepatitis, HIV, something like that. It really depends on the viral load that is on that needle. And so, that's something that they worry about with, that. So when you talk about like influenza, of course, viral load's going to be important. And
now, we don't get killing people, though.
No. Influenza kills quite a few people every year. I think last, it's averages about 50 to 60,000 people a year. Yeah. And if you have a really bad influenza year, it can kill up to like 80, 90,000. And that's just in the United States. Worldwide, triple that number. And so, anytime you have a virus that affects, even healthy people, but mostly, those that are really sick, immunocompromised, that's who it really, is at risk for passing away from, influenza, COVID-19. And so we should always take these viruses seriously.
How do people protect themselves and their families from COVID-19? I realize that this has been spoken about night and day on the radio, but as a guy who studies this for a living, can you give us some good tips for people at home to do some simple stuff to be able to, put our mind at ease and protect ourselves a little more.
For myself, when I go to the stores, I kind of stock up for a couple of weeks at a time, just so I don't have to go to the store so much. I don't have to be around sick people, people that may be potential carriers, again, because I work at the hospital. And so I don't want to expose myself to them or vice versa, because I'm one of those people that needs to be able to work to help those that may potentially become sick. And so, like I said, wearing a mask when you're in public can help cut it down, mostly if you're sick, from passing it on to other people, and maybe a lesser chance of getting it passed on to you. Washing your hands, using antiseptic wipes, get your hands clean, whether it's like Purell or you can make your own at home, like using at least like a 60%, alcohol base, and then some like aloe vera that you can get for like sunburns, mixing those together, put them in a little squirt bottle. That way you always have something to kind of clean your hands after going to the store. Don't wear gloves. I've seen a lot of people that wear gloves on their hands. When we work in the hospital and you see nurses putting gloves on, we're doing a specific task, and then we're throwing those gloves away, washing our hands, putting a new pair on to do a different task. And so you'll see people out in the community who are constantly wearing the same gloves all day, and then they touch their cell phone, they touch, that box of cereal at the store, they're rubbing their face, they got their mask on, and they keep putting it on and off, on and off. And so they're just, it's like a safety blanket for them, putting those gloves on. They think they're going to be protected, but instead they're actually taking more of a risk because they're not actually washing their hands as much. And so I would just say, forego the gloves. And if you do wear a mask, touch it very minimally. And they're uncomfortable. The N95 masks, that's probably the best mask to have. But our healthcare providers have a use for those because we're in those patients' rooms the whole time. So that's why they're advocating for the cloth masks, more so for the public. But wearing those N95 masks, if you have like a respiratory problem, I've known people to faint and, pass out, because I know when I wear mine, it's really hard to like have a 10-minute conversation with someone, because it's a struggle to get air in and out, in and out. And so like eventually you're just like, I got to take a breather. And so I have noticed that it's harder to breathe. And so, wearing clothes out in public and walking around all day, I think would be tough for, the elderly and, those that have respiratory issues like asthma. And so that's why I kind of recommend the cloth masks for those cases.
And you made a great point about the mask, is that I see people walking around wearing the mask on their neck.
Yeah, that
and
doesn't
I'm
do
like,
any good.
You're doing more harm to yourself than good. I mean, think about it, right? You're inhaling all those potential particles and spreading them on your face. If you touch it with your hand and then put it back, it's almost asking like to get infected, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're more likely. And a lot of people wear their mask like right underneath their nose, and you're breathing all that stuff in, and then your mask is sudden covered with whatever, and so they're reusing the same masks. And so at least with the cloth mask, you can take it home and wash it, where those one-time use masks, you got to have like special UV lights or the special chemicals to clean them like the hospitals do.
We're running real low on N95s right now, so we've been putting them in the sunlight.
Yep.
I don't know what the science is that for sure. I don't think anybody does, but
yeah,
they're saying it works.
Yeah, with the UV light, I think it's like, is it UVA light or something? It's one of those that really kills the virus. Then another thing that I've been seeing myself personally, when we have to wear, like our surgical masks with we usually wear them over our N95s to just keep them protected from the splatter. But the back of your ears start to hurt.
Yeah.
Because it's rubbing. And so anything like kind of that piece of fabric with 2 buttons sewn on it can kind of keep your strings off the back of your ears. And so if you do wear a mask, make sure you're keeping those strings off your ears so you don't get skin breakdown. That's something else I'd recommend.
I know right now they're doing, they make the P300, or I think it's level 3 surgical masks, which you can't really get anymore for civilians. But they were recommending for a while, if we were going to run out of N95s, to try to get our hands on the level 3 surgical masks.
Yeah.
And people are 3D printing these like things that will go here and fit it directly to your face so you don't get any leakage.
And then they have different like filters that go in there.
Yes. There's so much improvising going on right now, and it's impressive to see some of the stuff we are seeing.
Yeah, and my like local university is printing out the actual mask part. So a lot of universities, a lot of companies that have those 3D printers are really stepping up.
Yeah.
And so we're really lucky to have, those kind of, I guess, what do you want to call it? Resources in the community. And
I was talking with an oral surgeon the other day, and he was saying how can't get his hand. I don't know why, but he can't get his hands on face shields.
Yeah.
So got a 3D printer. He's making them himself.
Oh yeah, and we've been seeing that all across the country in hospitals all over, is just being resourceful and finding maybe other materials that we normally wouldn't use, but have been kind of certified or passed off by the CDC to use in these scenarios, just because we just don't have a stockpile, and we have the strategic stockpile.
Yeah.
That everybody's like, oh, it's depleted and stuff like that. Well, I just got done doing a big paper on it. N95 masks are only good for 5 years. After 5 years, you can't use them. So they do have an expiration date. And so on one hand, we can say, like, why don't we have millions of these things stored around? But you gotta look at the storage, the maintenance, and then they're only good for 5 years, and then you gotta resupply that stockpile. And so it's just kind of, there's just, when something like this happens, there's just no clear answers, and we just kind of do the best we can because it's always different. It attacks a different system. Like we had Ebola a couple years ago. That was a big scare, and that's a lot different from COVID-19. And so you can kind of have a general game plan for when things like this happen, as a nation. But I think what's really important for us as individuals, whether we're in charge of a family, in charge of ourselves, we need to start looking at how do we keep ourselves and those that are close to us protected. And so, I recommend, at least having 6 months worth of food that you can, rely on, and that can be stored long term. But then have at least 2 to 3 weeks of your normal food, canned goods, stuff that, you can keep in your freezer. That way, kind of like what we saw with the first part of this pandemic is store shelves were just bare. You go in, and that's something that I saw quite often. I'd go in just because it was just fascinating to see the pandemonium that was going on. And it was sad to see dads trying to take care of their families and being like, on the phone with their wives, being like, honey, whatever you can find, just get it. We'll worry about the finances later. And you just had this people's look of sheer just not knowing what to do. They were scared. And for myself, knowing I had, ample supply of food at home, because I always buy in bulk whenever I go shopping, because I hate going shopping. I wasn't worried about it, but just seeing the look on people's faces, we should wake up and use COVID-19 as a good wake-up call, as a good practice run for when something does hit the fan that's really bad, that there's no, traffic, because we still had semi-trucks delivering food, and, we still had electricity, we still have all the stuff that we need to survive. But what happens when something comes down the road, like a big pandemic, and so they're so worried about it transmitting that they shut down all forms of travel, and not even semi-trucks can get through. And so having at least a 6-month supply of whether it's, dehydrated food, Mountain House, MREs, whatever, then, at least you can get through even if it's 3 months, you like to think big sometimes, but it's, if you're financially, secure, maybe look at the bigger picture. But, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, maybe get a couple cans extra when you go to the store every week and kind of build up your supply. That way, when something like this happens again in the future, I think we're just going to start seeing more and more as the world starts getting more global instead of, area by area. We're going to see more of this stuff in the future. And then finances too. They shut down the economy. And so, start out with, whatever you can, have an extra $500 in the bank, an extra 1,000 that you don't touch. That way, you always have a supply. And when something like this happens, it's not as scary.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about the financial aspect of this. And even if we do see a major downturn in the economy, which we are.
Yeah.
If you've got that extra little bit of food put away, that's one less thing you have to buy with your paycheck, right?
Sure.
That's one more thing. If you've got extra toilet paper already, and I'm sure now everybody's going to be stockpiling toilet paper. But,
yep.
If you've got these extra things already, that's one less thing you have to buy. Lord forbid, you lose a job, or your spouse loses a job, or your income gets cut, whatever happens, if you've got enough to last you for another month or 2 or 3,
yep,
that's just, it's insurance policy, I think.
It's really hard to say, because you always want to find a career that is safe during times like this, so that, you're always essential. But, I would say the best career right now is to be like a grocery person, because people still need food, but like working up to the hospitals and stuff across the country, if there's not people coming because they're not coming in for, surgeries, or they're too scared to come in because they're sick, then all of a sudden these jobs that you thought would never have, that would never go out of style, are all of a sudden, hospitals. I mean, they're talking about hospitals shutting down because of funds. Some of those rural clinics, rural hospitals and stuff, they're hurting very, really bad financially because of this, because there's nobody coming in that's sick. And so, I mean, we're going to see a major downturn with, I think, careers all across the board, except for groceries and those things that, electricity, internet, stuff like that, are really, that people depend on.
Dude, I was at the grocery store the other day talking with this young kid, and he said they offered to let me go home if I was scared and keep my paycheck every, month.
Yeah.
Or they bumped me up like $5 an hour to come in and work my normal job.
Oh, yeah.
I said, holy crap, man, dude, that's incredible. Like, but they're so essential at this point.
Oh, yeah. Like Home Depot and Lowe's. You go past any one of those home improvement stores, they're packed 24/7, as long as they're open, not 24/7, but, I mean, there's never a dull moment there, and they're getting paid an extra $5, $6-7 here and there. And I mean, it's because they were deemed essential,
It's so crazy, like you're saying, how the essential services, it's put a new spin on what we consider an essential service.
Oh, for sure.
It used to be guys like you and me and police and military, and now it's like FedEx drivers, UPS guys, like
Amazon.
Amazon, yeah. Crazy. So let's switch gears a little bit here and talk a little bit about wilderness medicine. And that's something that's always fascinated me personally. Now, when we're talking about this pandemic, we're talking about even the possibility, it's becoming more remote now that you'd have to bug out. If you haven't already bugged out, you're where you are, right? But, we talk about on my channel a lot, my YouTube channel, about bug out bags and stuff like this. Can you give us kind of some thoughts about maybe some wilderness medicine, either training, supplies, things like that?
Well, so like in relation to COVID, the thing that I kind of connected the dots on was like when we're on a river trip going down like the main Salmon or Gates of Lador, like one of those multi-day, you're not anywhere near any kind of, I guess, your normal resources. You don't have a flushing toilet, nothing like that. The biggest thing is, again, simple: washing those hands. Could you imagine if you're in a group of like 20 people and one of you has like the stomach flu, like also known as norovirus, and they're preparing the food, and all of a sudden everybody in camp gets it? So, I mean, you take that same concept, put it towards this Corona-19, COVID-19. And so washing your hands is super important, because if you're touching other people's food, preparing it, and then they come and touch it, COVID-19 in most situations could spread like wildfire. And that's why we've seen, the Forest Service and the BLM cutting, permits to nothing, because they just don't want people on the river being in those tight-knit communities where if one person has, coronavirus, it spreads to everyone else. And so, if you're on a family trip in the backcountry, you're going hiking, backpacking, washing your hands is essential. And that's like step one of any, EMT class, making sure BSI seems safe, make sure that, either when you're prepping meals, you got your gloves on, and then as soon as you're done cutting the food up, you throw those gloves away. And so in relations to COVID-19, I'd say, both at home, if you're bugging in, or if you're out in the wilderness bugging out, because we've seen a lot of people camping now because they figured, well, I'm not working, I don't have any reason to be where people are sick, so I'm going to take my camping gear and go out and camp for a week or two until this thing blows over. We've seen that. We've seen people that have, cabins out here in the Intermountain West in Idaho who have come from these bigger cities, and then they've, brought coronavirus with them. And so some of our more rural counties have seen a higher incident rate than our bigger cities, because people were bugging out to their, rural cabins, and it ended up getting a lot of people sick.
Wow.
So that's something that we've seen. And any of your ski resorts too, that have a lot of people from like New York, California, they've seen it as well, like Park City and Salt Lake, that area.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's so true about washing your hands. And people don't think about it. I remember when, I was going to One Shepherd and doing other paramilitary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You got to take a shit in the woods, right? And if you don't have a shit kit with like some hand sanitizer in it or something, you go to crack open your MRE, like, think about it, right?
Yep.
Bad.
And it can spread so fast, and then, there's a book out there called How to Shit in the Woods. And a lot of people just think that, that's just day one stuff. But when we're on these river trips and stuff, we have, it's called a groover. It's what we take with us. And it's a self-contained, it seals pretty tight, but there's a whole process for it too, And so, you really got to be clean when you're outdoors. It's not, time to get dirty. You want to make sure you're taking your baths, your showers, when you're urinating, urinate in the river or a creek. That way it dilutes, And so, if you have a campground, you're not peeing in the same spot, which, starts to build up a smell and can attract critters, so.
Have you ever come across anything to help deal with poison ivy? And what I mean by that is I get terrible freaking poison ivy, man. And like, especially doing the small unit stuff, I'm always in it. I'm rolling around in it, I'm bouncing through it. And I'm out there for 3-4 days without being able to grab a shower or anything. Do you have any suggestions?
I want to say it's like, how do you say it? Calamine cream?
Yeah.
Calamine. Yeah. So I know that helps. I've seen some soaps out there that say they help with ivy, poison ivy. Mostly the biggest thing is getting that, there's a sap that's on that poison ivy, getting that washed off. And then if you have like a Benadryl rub or, any kind of like Benadryl, like allergy pills, because that's what mostly, Benadryl doesn't really help with anything but like topical reactions. And so having that in your kit could help. But again, it's just one of those things that you just kind of got to deal with until it kind of works out on its own.
Have you, and wanted to bring this up right now because I know you're like actually kind of a humble guy about this. When we were talking last time, you were telling me about there was an incident where you actually pulled up and administered CPR to a lady and saved her life from this. And you weren't even working. You were just going on a date or something, right?
Yep. I was driving across Idaho, going from my house to, the other side of the state where my girlfriend lives, and just driving around the corner on the interstate, I could see all this dust in the air, and I actually thought, I'm like, that can't be good. And coming around the corner, and there was a car that was in the middle of the median, and all the tires looked blown out. And at first I was like, they must have blown a tire and come to, stop there. And I was going to keep going because there was a bunch of people already getting out. But then when I looked at the driver's seat, I could see the lady slumped over, and I was like, I can't not stop, like when you get into these healthcare professional careers, or if you're an EMT, or if you've taken a first aid class, like I feel like you have a duty to stop. You've gained that education, so you have a duty to act.
Yeah.
And so I pulled over and ran over there, and we got her out of the car. And at first she was breathing, and she was unconscious at the time, but her vitals were okay. I could feel a pulse in her wrist, so I knew she had adequate perfusion. I actually was on the phone with 911, and it just got done telling them, she's okay, she's breathing, she's got a pulse. I'm a nurse, and, giving them that. And as soon as I hung up, I looked down, and she started doing those agonal breaths, which looks like a fish out of water, taking those gulps of air. I was like, that's not good. And all of a sudden, like, I went to feel a pulse and had no pulse. And so I actually remember myself putting her on her back and said, well, it's time to get to work. And, started doing chest compressions. And when we're in those environments, the last thing you want to do is, because they've, the American Heart Association has gone away from doing the rescue breaths, mouth to mouth, to just doing hands only compressions. Because for the layperson, it's a lot easier just to do the, compressions instead of trying to remember, is it 30? Is it 100? How often do we, do mouth to mouth? And especially when you don't have any barriers, you don't know what that person has, and you don't want to be transferring anything to them or vice versa. And so, every 100 compressions, I would stop real quick and get a pulse and listen for a breath. And I probably did 6 to 7 cycles of those. And so, I took anywhere, I think they said around 10 minutes. And usually in the hospital setting, you're only doing CPRs for 2 because you have so many people that you're rotating. And so when an EMS showed up and they started throwing the oxygen on her, I was like, where's my oxygen? It's kind of kicked my butt. But then, I got a ride from the state police back to my truck because traffic had picked up. It was kind of a miracle when I crossed the road, there was like no traffic. And then trying to get back to my truck, it was just like nonstop, bumper to bumper traffic. So, but I didn't tell anyone other than, I just, what I did for work in the town that I work in. And so that's all they had to go off of when this lady survived and tried to contact me. And so I was actually on a river trip, and I have one of those Garmin InReach deals that you can text with via satellite.
Oh, cool.
So even if I'm in the backcountry, I still have some kind of connection to, home, and great for emergencies too. And so my sister texted me and said, hey, that lady that you saved, she's alive and wants to get a hold of you. And, being on a river trip, being in like some of the most amazing country, having that, it was just like icing on the cake to have a, success. And so then, we met up, and, we're great friends now, and things are going awesome for her. And she was able to go on a couple more vacations with her, family, and, she's doing great right now. And so because I knew CPR, I stopped. I took, I wasn't selfish with my time. I was, in that I gotta do this because I have a duty to act. I ended up saving a life. And so, I'm a huge fan of Stop the Bleed, how to use a tourniquet, basic first aid. Everybody thinks that they got to go and take all these like super hard, long classes, but just even your basics is what we all resort to, CPR, stop the bleed, and all that other stuff that falls into place.
That's so amazing, Chris. I'm so glad that you guys are still friends. I'm so glad that you were like stopped in the first place. And I'm not going to say much on this, but I know some people might not have stopped. So, yeah, it's good that you did, man.
Oh, thank you.
And I just want to say for people out there, you don't, Chris, you made a great point, dude, is that you don't think you need to don't think that you need to go and get your EMT or even your EMR or like even, higher levels than that, paramedic. Like, it's great to have.
Yeah.
But all of the stuff that you're going to get, like in decon, bleeding control, basic first aid, CPR, AD, that's all the stuff you're going to use anyway.
Oh, yeah. No,
Yeah.
for sure. I mean, I started out with my EMT training, and now I'm going to school for a nurse practitioner, and I love learning. And so, I have my wilderness first responder through the NOLS, which National Outdoor Leadership School. And so any kind of learning opportunity I can find, I'm always going after because I just love learning. And so a lot of people don't have that time, so even just your 1 day basic first aid class is going to pay out huge dividends down the road.
Yeah.
If not for you, but for someone else.
Oh, for sure. Like, especially for guys like you and I who like to be prepared, who like to think about, what if. The biggest thing that I use day to day and not like outside of firefighting is either medical or driving. And it's none of the tactical stuff,
Yeah. All that tactical stuff is fun to do. I've been to several shooting classes, and I try to stay
ask you about this. Now what was the name of the school that you went to?
I go to Front Sight.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
How do you like Front Sight?
I love it. It's great for beginners and for people that are intermediate to maybe even more advanced, because for the beginners, you have like your 4-day pistol class where I've taken my mom, my sister, brother-in-law, and Front Sight's really good with covering, the basic gun handling. And they really focus heavy on the manipulations, which everybody wants to be like running around, running and gunning, shooting out of cars, shooting under cars, doing all that cool stuff. But without, just like in first stage, without the basics, what happens when all of a sudden you get a type 1, type 2 malfunction and you're doing all that running and gunning and you don't have that firm foundation and I got to pay, tap rack, and do all that stuff that we look at as boring later on, but still, like, you got to have those fundamentals. I mean, how many times do you see like the video of a cop that's, his gun's all of a sudden jammed and something bad happens, because it's not ingrained. And I've shot with a lot of cops at these schools, and they walk away saying, we don't get this kind of education back at our department, And so when you have cops that are saying that, it's just take like a 4-day class of just the basics. Again, just like first aid, it's going to pay huge dividends when you're in an actual, concealed carry incident where you're protecting your family or yourself. And they also at Front Sight go over like your color code of awareness, how to be on the lookout. And on one of the days in the 4-day, you go through like a shoot house. So you learn how to clear corners. And I've kind of progressed up the ladder and taken some of their more advanced classes. The biggest lesson I've learned is I don't want to be in a shootout because when things go south, they go south.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's one of those things that learning how to avoid confrontation, saying I'm sorry, like if somebody gets up in your face because you cut them off or something, let that ego go and apologize and, and just learn how to walk away from things, because you taking a life isn't worth it unless it's a dire circumstance, because not only are you going to face the legal consequences possibly depending on where you live, but they can also come after you in civil court. And so they can sue you for everything that you have. And, it's just the headache. It kind of makes you think it's almost not worth it to carry conceal, but just knowing what I know, it's like I carry because I'd much rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. But it makes you think, like, how's the best way to get out of this situation without having to resort to a final, something so final as pulling your gun.
And that's something so samurai too that you say, is that it's way better to be able to say I'm sorry and walk away from it than have to resort to deadly force or even fist fights, but more so with the deadly force. They say a samurai, you knew when you were in danger is because he would be smiling larger. He would be smiling bigger.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel like, with guys like yourself who are protectors, who are very well trained protectors nonetheless, who you would never start a confrontation. You would never, ever think about it. But you would end one pretty fast,
Yeah. If push comes to shove, I like to think of myself as like a non-aggressive person. But when that time comes, I do a lot of hunting, and I'm in bear country. I'm in these places that there's all these other elements. I feel like if ever I came to that moment that I needed to step up, I could turn that switch.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you need to focus on. Being that person, I guess they call it the gray man, is not being the one that everybody knows in the room. That person has a gun because they're wearing, that tactical shirt or, something that sticks out. But at the same time, I put off this air that I know what I'm doing. Don't mess with me. But in such a way that non-threatening, I guess,
100%.
You got to be able to blend in.
I think that's so true, because I always know when a guy knows how to handle himself. Not always. I'm, just a human. But I generally know when a guy knows how to handle himself. And it's not through looking at him. It's just, I don't know what it is. I still haven't figured it out. It's some kind of fucking warrior force field that when another warrior looks at another warrior, they know. It's just, call it micro expressions, call it body language, whatever you want. But it's so true. And it's confidence that I think you can only get by preparing for the battle, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and something I wanted to kind of touch on real quick, kind of talking about hospitals. And a lot of people don't realize, but healthcare workers are some of the most, abused workforce in the United States, like after, police and stuff, of course. But, one of the things that I'm really trying to work on right now for myself is learning self-defense hand to hand, because there's been, especially with the coronavirus, healthcare workers have been attacked. I believe there was 3 nurses down in Mexico City that were murdered because of the people that murdered them were equating them to spreading the coronavirus because they were helping the sick. And so there's been a huge spike in murders, especially where hospitals are usually weapons free. Mm-hmm. And so it's an easy place for someone that has a grudge to attack. And then the patients too, a lot of them aren't stable. And so they lash out. And, so having those hand-to-hand skills, not maybe more you're grappling and how to not get someone on top of you, not so much, punches and stuff, but how to put people into submissive locks. That way, security can come and we can get them taken care of. Because obviously, as a healthcare worker, my patient safety is first and foremost, as well as my own. Yeah. And so that's something that I'm looking at too. And so, having those skills, maybe not how to fight hand to hand and, punches and knives and stuff, but how to stay off the ground and, avoid the confrontation, reading that body language, because that's something that really helps me out in the public is when I'm handling patients who, are, have, maybe a psych issue and they're lashing out. When you start developing that body language skill and how to read it, you can see when people are about to turn.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's something that I would stress too, is instead of focusing so much on, hand to hand, I'm going to punch someone out, but how to, grapple, I guess is Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I think in survival situations really would be a great help.
Yeah, it's so true. Jiu-jitsu, I love jiu-jitsu, man. And I think that you're really onto it there, is that, and I know I roll actually with a bunch of nurses, funny enough. And it's the perfect art because you learn how to keep your stability on your feet. Someone shoots in, you learn how to sprawl. You You learn all that, but then you also learn, how to just hold someone,
Yep.
keep them the fuck down. Like, it's really great stuff. And I like that you're trying to focus more on that than the boxing and the crazy Krav Maga stuff. Because honestly, that's more practical anyway. I feel bad.
Or at least what I do.
Yo, it's 100% for what you do.
Yeah.
When I was doing my clinicals, man, I saw so many nurses getting abused in like the 10 simple hours I was there by all these like drunk patients who would come in, fuck off your damn blah, blah, blah. It was insane, man. And that was 10 hours. Like, like, it was, I don't know how you guys deal with it at the end of the day, to be honest.
Well, there is a huge burnout in the healthcare field.
Yeah.
And, for myself, I have my rafting, I have my hunting and fishing. You got to find those escapes. And, in those situations that those patients, are really bad. I mean, they're not in their best state of mind. Either they're having, like the psych breakdown, they're on alcohol, drugs, and so they're not in their normal state. And so you got to have to disassociate that. Like, that's not them. But at the same time, you can't let them run amok, hurt other staff, hurt themselves. And so, we do go through some training at the hospital level with security and, how to get multiple people in there to, get them down so that, you can safely protect them as well as people, in the work, environment. And
why do you think it is that we see a lesser incidence amongst RNs and higher level of care with alcoholism than we do with first responders? I see, I know a lot of EMTs, firefighters, cops. It's a big thing amongst us that, people tend to struggle sometimes. It's not spoken about a lot, but at the higher level of care, you see less of that. Why do you think that is?
I think we still see it, maybe at a lesser extent, but I mean, there's still, I think any of those situations, you're going to see people using drugs. Maybe they just get better at hiding it and they're not as vocal about it. They don't get caught, but maybe the hospitals are quicker to help with getting them into like rehabilitation programs, because like what we're seeing in California is like first responders are some of the first areas of get budget cuts when it comes down to it. And so, I mean, you guys obviously aren't getting the kind of funds that, a private hospital would have to help in those situations. And
like you said, I think it is level of training too. You guys go through a lot more preparation, schoolwork, training. So that could have something to do with it too.
Maybe more resources.
Could be. So before we start to close out here, and I could honestly go like a lot longer with you, man, but we'll have to do a part 2 sometimes.
For sure. I'd be down.
How would you recommend people proceed from here? I mean, you're a man of many facets, which is interesting to me. And this is why I had you on the program, is because you've got a shitload of medical training. You've got an extensive firearms background, survival. You're starting with a hand-to-hand now. You're really becoming like what I like to call like an all-encompassing warrior. What would you say that people should do from here? Okay, the pandemic's stricken. Can't really go out right now and train. Yeah. But if somebody's watching and they're saying, I was never into this shit before, but okay, I'm on board now. Where should we go from here?
I think education, honestly. The more you educate yourself on what COVID-19 is, like I'm going to have to look about the receptors, Yeah. It's like I've heard about it because I've taken like classes on it and stuff. This is not an area that I'm like,
sure,
I'm really proficient in. But, like go to your local library or, whatever resources that you have, like you're on, most libraries have like a website, and see if you can find information on COVID. Because I feel like what the media is saying, they're just wanting views. And so the more scary it sounds, the more people are going to click on those links. And that's Fox, CNN, all of them. Mm-hmm. But if you can go to outside sources from the media and get evidence-based science, is what we call it in the healthcare field, and actually read up on, how this is spreading, how prevalent it is in your community, I think it would take some of that fear away.
Yeah.
And then if you're a type of person, because like in my family, I have family that lives in Canada, they don't have the gun knowledge and stuff, and they've been coming to my family and saying like, because some of them have moved down to the States, and they're like, what kind of pistol do I get? What kind of ammo do I need? And so seeking out people that have safe gun handling skills, if you don't, and asking them to maybe take you out to the range and kind of show you the ropes where, you can't go to a professional school right now. That's something I would look at and highly recommend. That way you can feel like you're protecting your family and your stuff, because if this economy crashes, I mean, I think you're going to see more and more cases of people breaking in, kind of like, was it Acadia? I think that was the city where that husband was in the shower, came out, and the two masked guys came storming into his house, and he chased the one guy out and made him run away, and they went back in and he shot the guy in the house.
Yeah.
Does that ring a bell?
It does, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I think you're going to see more and more of that. People wearing masks, your guards down, because everybody's wearing a mask, and so people can use that as like their kind of like jumping off point to cause trouble. And so, making sure that your house security is up to date, this is the basics, making sure your, lower level windows are locked, the brush is cleared away, if you have like some cameras or something, so you can always see what's going on, and just taking those steps to making sure your family's protected financially, food wise, making sure. This is another point I want to bring up, having at least 3 months of your day-to-day medications. Like if you have insulin, metformin, stuff that you got to take in order to survive, making sure you have at least 3 months worth of supplies. Get a hold of your doctor, get it figured out, make sure it's, shelf stable. And, just kind of having all your bases covered, I think if you can lessen that fear of what may or may not happen, I think you can get through this a whole lot better than being, out there in the wind, is what I like to say, with no direction.
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with everything that you said, and I couldn't have said it better myself. And I don't think I've had a podcast guest on yet that said it so simply and right on, man. That was a good explanation right there. Appreciate that.
I try to simplify it, there's a lot of stuff, but that if you can just break it down to the basics and simplify it, because not everybody has, a college education. Not everybody is going on to graduate school. And so, a lot of times we as patients, when we go to the doctors, we're hearing all these terms, and then we don't know what's going on because the doctor is speaking at this level, our nurses are speaking at that level. And so we resort to the internet, and then all of a sudden the internet can say whatever the internet wants to say. And so all of a sudden, like WebMD, what I say about it is all searches lead to death, because eventually, it's going to be like, oh, if you have this, it's probably cancer,
Yeah.
But if we just take the time, I mean, I'm a huge fan of education. I'm just going to lead off with that. And no matter what level. I mean, you can listen to podcasts, YouTube videos, read a book. There's so much free information out there that if it passes your sniff test, it's going to pay huge dividends in the long run to start paying attention to that and people that know what they're talking about, and listening to people on the news who are just doing it because they're trying to get so many articles in a week.
Yeah.
Or, listening to politicians who aren't specialists in certain areas, or, even specialists who think they're specialists. They don't pass your sniff test. Go find someone that maybe not so much an echo chamber. It's always good to branch out and get other views, but, you got to seek out that information for yourself. So I would say when it comes to COVID-19, educating yourself on the actual signs and symptoms, instead of, oh, so-and-so said this or so-and-so said that. Getting the facts for yourself, protecting your family, protecting yourself by taking those simple steps, washing your hands, wearing a mask if you feel like you need to. I'm not going to tell everybody they need to wear it, because in some cases you don't, and sometimes it's medically, contraindicated. But, just you got to do what's best for you.
And I think that that's really what it is, man, is you got to do what's best for you, but know when to do what is best for you.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that's the biggest problem is like, we talk about bugging out, bugging in, like when do you do what, because like, I wonder if people bugged out for this situation, but then society didn't quite collapse like they like expected during something this big, like say like an EMP or something.
Yeah.
If we have something like that, that's the time that you get out of town because nobody's going to have any kind of transportation. There's going to be no hospital. Everything is just shut down, and so I guess you gotta find that, hey, when do I want to have my food supply at home so that I can prepare, and when do I have it at my location out in the woods or at my retreat cabin or whatever.
And that brings up a good point, though, is this has really given everyone, especially the preppers out there, a dry run.
Oh yeah, test run. That's what I've been calling it.
It's really going on out there. Like there's some hardcore shit happening, but yeah, no, this is a dry run, and guys like you and I are studying every aspect we can, I think, right now.
And I mean, I've had to kind of, this is an area that I need to work on. Like I need to have this ready to go, and maybe I can, do a little bit less over here.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, refining those rough coarse edges, and sharpened my skills, I guess.
Do you think from now on, N95 masks are going to be like the fucking hot ticket? Like everyone's going to buy a box after they come available again.
Yeah. I think for a long time, that and gloves are going to be hard to find because everybody's going to be like, oh, I got to have it. But again, they only last for 5 years. So, I mean, how much of it do you buy? I mean, I found online like a reusable N95 mask with the filter. I think it's called like an Envo mask. And so I bought the mask itself and then a bunch of the inserts because I wanted to be prepared where I worked in a hospital. And I was seeing like in New York and all these other places, the severe shortage of PPEs. But I've been really lucky that my hospitals, we haven't had that. So things have been on the up and up there, at least because we haven't around here in this, Intermountain West, we haven't been hit hard like they have been back east.
Yeah.
And so I kind of took initiative to have that backup plan for myself, because I don't want to come down with this, not because I'm worried about myself, but if your healthcare workers start going down, who's going to take care of the sick?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, first off, and that's kind of why they had that whole, stay at home, shelter in place, was because they didn't want to inundate, overbear the hospitals because, our PPE was low. We only have so many vents. And so that's kind of why, but then it kind of turned into a 3-4 month deal and it kind of got away from us, I think.
Yeah.
But the initial 14 days, I think was going to be really beneficial, but then it kind of turned into something that maybe it shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But
I don't know why that is either, too, because like there's so many conspiracy theories out there about it, which I love a good conspiracy theory, but I don't buy the fact that they're trying to, I don't know, like they're not coming for our guns, not yet at least. And it's nothing to do with like the New World Order trying to give you the mark of the beast. Not yet, at least. So, it's the type of thing that I don't know why we're still locked down. Whereas, like, I understand where I am in the tri-state area. Yeah, sure, we need to be probably, but you guys out there don't, and it's
and that's why we're opening up. Slowly by slowly, because we don't want to just open up and then all of a sudden have this huge increase.
Yeah.
And so I think they're being smart, but again, those people that are being affected because their jobs aren't open yet, it's difficult for them to agree with it,
right.
And so everybody else needs to take that into account, like the reason these people are protesting in California, it's not because they're, on one spectrum, they're not left or right or whatever. It's they're worried about how do they feed their family? How do they take care of their bills? Because rent's still due, even though they put like I think, Andrew, your governor in New York put like a 3-month hiatus on paying rent. But come July 1st, all that back rent's going to be due.
Yeah.
And so people are worried about this. And so I don't think it's, oh, we're for Trump or we're for Biden or, I don't think it's that. I think people are worried about protecting their own, protecting their family, paying bills. And so if you have a job and you're working and you're saying these people are nut jobs for protesting, you're not being fair to them because they're trying to fight for their livelihoods. And so we got to take that into account.
And it's you touch on the protest there is we're starting to see society break down with these protests. I think that's another reason why they are rushing to open up so quickly. And I know President Trump is really for opening back up, and he's not an idiot like people say, but he's a smart man no matter what the opinion is of him. And he realizes that, look, the fucking meat plants were about to shut down. We were about to see mass armed protests in the street. It's going to get bad. We need to open back up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and like with Trump, whether you like him or you don't like him, he's a business guy. Yeah. He'll surround himself with people that do know what they're talking about or he doesn't maybe. And so I think that's the one thing that no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, you should be able to agree with. Like at least he has some pretty good people that maybe he doesn't see eye to eye with politically, but he listens, and no matter what the media likes to say, because they're trying to paint the picture how they see it, I think what he's doing is best for the country overall.
Yeah.
So, and that's who you need in power. Someone that's listening to all sides, not just his own echo chamber.
Yeah, and I'm quite confident. Put it to you like this: I will be a lot more confident with him at the helm than Joe Biden, simply because I don't know what Biden's mental capacity actually is these days. I don't know the man. I'm just hearsay, but it is what it is. So,
well, everybody that I know that works with certain patients, that's something that they all point out is, is he just going to be like the face of somebody else that tells him what to do because he just may or may not be all there, but
Joe.
yeah.
But one more question for you medically here, man. The KN95 masks that were imported from China. What's your opinion on these things?
My opinion, if they're rated and they're proven, from a respectable company, because, like 3M, they make a lot of their masks over in China. And I know they do a lot in Canada as well as here in the United States. Then I don't think their quality control is going to let masks that aren't safe to slip by. But I've seen a lot of information out there about masks coming over from companies or manufacturers that aren't, build proven.
Yeah.
And so I would be very hesitant to wear a mask that wasn't from those major companies. I think you posted something the other day on Instagram that showed masks that were approved.
I did.
By the US government.
There's 7 companies that are like NIOSH approved at this point.
Yeah. I would make sure they have that NIOSH approval on there. I wouldn't risk it just wearing a mask that just says N95 because products from China are notorious for being, counterfeits. And so I would just be very careful.
Fucking guys over there, they were stockpiling medical supplies for months before they even admitted that this thing was transmittable.
Oh, for sure. They were protecting their own.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We all got to protect our own, and I get it. But, it's what it is. Listen, Chris, I could keep going with you, man, but I don't want to, frustrate YouTube with a 3-hour-long video here. I'm not sure.
It's all good.
So, I always ask my guests who are as informed as you, if something pops off, and hopefully nothing will, but medically speaking or, even geopolitically, would you mind coming back on as a special Gutter Fighting Secrets informative guest or something?
Yeah,
Great.
For sure.
Appreciate that, man. Thank you.
Anytime. I've enjoyed this, and it's always fun to talk about geopolitics and, things that interest us and whatnot. And, like I said, when it comes to like COVID and stuff, sadly not an expert on it, but everything was just, what I've seen. And you got to be careful what you say on the internet with nurses and stuff. They like to eat their own. And so, if I said something that wasn't on par with, the scientific community and stuff, I apologize. And that wasn't my intention, but that's just kind of my feelings on the matter. And, it's what I've seen just from, the media and what I've researched. So.
No, and it's been incredibly informative for me. And you've given better answers, frankly speaking, than I have gotten talking from doctors. I think it's because you are able to break it down in terminology, layman's terminology for, guys like me out there who are definitely nowhere on par with all the schooling that you went through. So that's much appreciated.
Yep. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Wilderness_RN is Chris's Instagram handle, tag, whatever acronym you like. Highly recommend that you check out his page. The guy is full of some great information, as you can see. Well, guys, until next time, please remember that you are your first and last line of defense, and I will catch you on the next Tactical Podcast.